Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Are human predators in the wild a real thing? I've heard countless stories about people in the woods being stalked by humans, them wandering around their tent at night and such. Yet I've never experienced anything like that. Have you guys ever experienced being followed by a person while out?
Twice so far. Went camping with a buddy and an ex. Weird old guy showed up with a dog. Got my buddy really drunk and had to pull my buddy away. We had this setup where the tents hooked up to the car doors. Anyway, we were all in our respective tents and the weird guy kept coming over. At first he'd announce himself, but then started unzipping the tent and poking his head in to talk to us. I told him he needed to get out after the third time. I packed our stuff up and left. Second time was about 1.5 years ago, right outside of Zion on the road to the park from the hurricane. The GF and I were headed back up to the road from some falls we hiked to. Guy kept trying to stalk us, so we ditched him. We got to the road, which was the high ground, and when I looked down I could see him looking around for us. I got her to the truck and I stayed to watch him make his climb up the hill while making eye contact with him. There were no other cars out there and this guy looked like Jeffrey Dahmer. He got to the top and headed back towards the hurricane. Stay armed and alert, especially if you have hot chicks with you.
I live in Maine. Back when I was about 15 and my friend and I were walking to a pond about a mile in the woods. We were stalked by something. Man? Beast? No idea, but on most of the walk-in, we kept hearing twigs and branches on the ground snap about 100 feet behind us. Another story of my childhood in Maine. I lived on the edge of town, about a 5-minute walk away from my house. The street dead-ended and there was nothing left but millions of acres of the great North Woods. There was a little brook a ways in the woods from where the street dead-ended. It was a popular hangout and swimming hole for the kids in my neighborhood. We practically grew up in those woods. Anyway, there was an odd guy that lived close by and we would see him walking through the woods and fishing. He never once spoke to us. He lived with his mother. One day he went home and killed his mother and a pet pig with an axe. He spent the rest of his life in an insane institution a couple of hours away.
My brother and I were hiking a section of the Appalachian Trail and kept bumping into the same creepy guy. He followed us down a side trail, back up to the Appalachian Trail, made some comments about, "We gotta stop meeting like this," and tried to ask where we were planning on setting up camp for the night. Eventually we walked down a loop trail and when we saw he was following again we quickened our pace until we couldn't see him, then jogged 2 miles in gear around the loop again and doubled back the direction we had come from when we got back to the Appalachian Trail to set up our camp for the night. Didn't see him again. We were both armed, but still, who needs the hassle of some creepy encounter? Perhaps we were just overreacting, but you never know.
I got a bit of a story. I'm going to Greentext because it's short and why not? Be my family out in the Rockies for a summer backpacking trip. So far everything is going well and we're having fun. Eventually we get to a place where my dad wants to set up camp. Eventually it gets dark, and after eating some dinner, we all head to bed. As I'm falling asleep, I hear whooping out in the woods. It sounds like the type of whooping a redneck would make as they're running around in a forest. Then there's more whooping. It's coming from all around us. We're supposed to be the only ones here for miles. I'm a jumpy kid, so this freaks me out a bit. Suddenly hear a gunshot. This wakes up my dad, and he starts freaking out. More gunshots and whooping. There's a ghastly human scream for help as the people keep whooping. We freak out and start trying to hide our camp. We sit there for hours and eventually the whooping and gunshots die off in the distance. We wake in the morning and start packing up to get out of there. Suddenly we hear a voice in a tree. This obviously startles us. We look up and see an old dude sitting in a tree with a machete. He's missing a bunch of teeth, bleeding, and has really unkempt hair, beard. My dad asks if he can help him. He just starts whooping. We book it out of there. So yeah, I don't know what was going on or who those people are, but I still wonder what they were doing and what the man in the tree wanted.
First ever overnighter, I had someone show up to my campsite on an ATV in the middle of the night. They got off and walked fairly close to my tent. Then they proceeded to start their quad and drive off and come back every half hour till just before dawn, making sure to shine the headlights directly into my tent every time. I was already on edge from seeing a completely ripped apart tent at the campsite I had originally planned to stay at earlier in the day, so I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. No, I totally get that feeling. Back in 17, I got a super weird vibe from a guy just north of Neel Gap. I had gone down to that shelter that's like 2 miles off the trail to check it out and get some water. It was close to dusk, but nobody else was down there, and there were like 6 signs on the shelter wall about recent bear activity near the shelter. When I started back up the spur, this dude comes walking down and started asking me a bunch of questions about where I was planning on sleeping that night. I told him I was gonna head back up to the ridge and camp, and he tried to convince me to stay down at the shelter with him. I said nah and left. I looked back twice as I was walking away, and he was just standing there watching me leave. Soon as I couldn't see him anymore, I ran the rest of the way up that hill back to the Appalachian Trail. Went down and camped with a couple other guys near Hogpen Gap instead of up on the ridge. In hindsight, it was most likely nothing. But man, in the moment, it sure triggered a strong reaction in me.
I got followed once after sundown, when I was with a group. The person was in the tree line about a basketball court size away parallel, but a little behind us, and kept pace for 2 to 3 miles with no flashlight and without making much sound. At least I assume it was a person, and didn't sound like a cat to any of us. At the time it wasn't that scary because I was with a group with a bunch of big dudes. At the time I thought it was just a weird local making sure we made it out of the woods, since people don't usually hike at night. Looking back, it was really weird how quiet they were able to be at the pace we were keeping with no light. And it doesn't make a lot of sense for someone to stalk 3 people so long when I'm shining my light into the trees and yelling that we have guns and being a drunk the whole way. I don't think much of it, but it did make me think twice about doing the Pacific Crest Trail alone as a solo female.
In the book People of the Lie by Scott Peck MD, he talks about the generally pretty quick gut feeling you get when you are around a cluster B personality type. You are the product of millions of years of generations who have survived to pass on their genes. So generally, most people will have some sort of subconscious danger radar that picks up on something being wrong. Certain red flags, body language, etc. Thing is, and I've experienced this quite a lot with these cluster B types over the years, is like the title of the book, they're people of the lie. They are very often initially very charismatic and will lie so convincingly because they half believe their lies. So while you have very good predator radar, they, being a predator, have adapted other techniques to be a predator. And those lies and charisma are designed to put you in a sense of ease. Thing is, they can rarely keep a story straight. And they're often extremely pushy or clearly can't back up their rhetoric, which is a good red flag indicator. Had a bunch of roommates, work colleagues over the years that were BPD, NPD, so I have a very honed radar for sussing them out. Come across a few people on out excursions where all my internal danger cluster B predator alarms started blaring. Honestly believe a few of these people I've had to like in other stories here. Run across random people who are off. They want me to stay and camp with them and are often pretty touchy-feely, and I hightail it out of there. Had a few start rushing following me, but I'm an extremely fast walker, so I can make distance fast. They just wanted to be friends. I actually make a lot of acquaintances out hiking or in camping sites. Most people are generally sound, but the people who are off cluster B, your instincts can tell. Tip: listen to your initial gut feeling. Your instincts again can quickly sense danger.
I get the point of what you're saying, but gauging an entire psychological underpinning of someone from a brief hello as you pass on the trail is tenuous at best.
Predators will rarely just say hello and keep moving. They engage and keep engaging and try lower your defenses through charisma and lies. Again, I meet quite a lot of people out hiking and camping, and most people I meet are sound. Often end up having a campfire and some drinks with random people. With predators, you can usually tell pretty quickly from the engagement something is off. Your instincts are picking up things that are slightly off about what they are saying, or how they are engaging, or even their facial expressions. When you've been around BPDs and NPDs enough, you can often pick up on the sort of calculating gaze they have. This is a pretty common aspect people on BPD loved ones and raised by narcissists comment on a lot. The BPD, NPD eyes. For me, big red flags. Overly gregarious, want you to hang with them, and a bit too eager. Pushy manner, bragging, coming up with reasons why you should stay when you try to move on. The BPD eyes, they can't help but show it in their expressions, how they are calculating every move in the conversation like it's some video game dialogue branch. Really good example of the eyes is Natsumi in the reality show Terrace House. Absolutely BPD. NPD, and everyone commented how you could absolutely tell she was off through her eyes. Pick related. Either way, it's always good to be careful. Shit tons of these cluster B types out there, and they're generally always going to act predatory.
Hiking near Interlaken in Switzerland. The trail I was following had been washed out by a winter avalanche over a few kilometers. I crossed the Rubel but ended up going down too much, and missed the spot where trail resumed. I was too lazy to climb back up, so decided to go down the gully and catch up the trail at the bottom. Problem was, when I reached the bottom, the gully opened on a 30-meter waterfall on the other side, with the trail passing at the bottom. I climbed over one side of the gully and found myself at the top of a steep slope that flattened out and had trees allowing me to reach the trail safely on my left. On my right, the slope ended on a ledge over a 10 to 15 meters drop. I started down cautiously, and slipped, and started gliding down. I managed to turn around and dig my knees into the ground to stop myself. I was no laying face down against the slope, knowing it I slid again, would crash against a tree if I ended up on the safe side, or would just fly over the edge and very seriously hurt myself, or die, if I went to the other side. I managed to slowly dig the ground with my knife until I found a thick root that gave me a solid handle. I then punched and kicked foot/hand holds and moved across the slope that way until I got back to safety among the trees. First and last time I did something so stupid as trying to cut short across mountain terrain. Never again. I can still feel the adrenaline. The nasty scary one, not the cool exciting one just typing this, never again.
The worst I've had are a couple close calls resulting from me being careless while driving during road trips. One of them left me crying and shaking from how close to dying I was from being an idiot. But that doesn't really count as out, I guess. I have my bear and mountain lion stories too, but the worst situation was a time I forgot my raincoat while backpacking. Forecast was all clear, but on my second day of the trip I took off for a day hike, leaving my tent in place, and just about halfway through it started raining. Snowing pretty heavily. I was soaked and freezing while hiking, but what I was dreading was the possibility that water had gotten into my tent and soaked my sleeping bag while I was out, because then I'd have been screwed. Thankfully avoided that worst case, but the first little while in the tent and sleeping bag were worse than while I was hiking. First, it was a bit of an effort to take off my shoes and clothes as I had very little feeling in my fingers, and then since I was no longer moving I just felt colder. Was scared for a bit before I finally started to warm up. Took a couple hours to regain full feeling in my fingers and toes. Beautiful place though, great hike. It was Coyote Gulch near Escalante in Utah. The day hike was to Stevens Arch. Coyote Gulch is popular for good reason, but few people seem to make the extra trek to Stevens Arch. Definitely do so though, it's spectacular. I guess worst case I would have just hiked the 7 or 8 miles back to my car. Would have sucked though. There were other people around also if I needed help. Not a lot since it was winter and a weekday, but still a few other souls around.
Backcountry skiing, my buddy in front of me decided to change routes and went over a berm and into a gully. I was yelling for him to turn around, but he was already over, so I split second decided to follow. The gully led out to a 200 feet sheer cliff which we were not very far from the edge of. We took the skis off and had to traverse laterally to get out of the gully. We'd sink chest deep if we tried to stand, and that's just where it got compacted enough. Otherwise, snow was easily 8 feet plus deep on probably a 30-degree slope. Had to crawl with one ski in each hand on our hands and knees so we could stay on top of the snow. There were snow clumps all the way up the gully where it was obvious a previous avalanche had ran through. So we basically had to crawl in silence for like 2 hours in 6+ feet deep snow in a gully where avalanches obviously occurred. All the snow had to do was break and we'd have been washed away in chest deep, probably submerged avalanche off a cliff.
I was hiking with a couple people on shit trails that were completely frozen over in about 8 Fahrenheit weather and miscalculated how long it would take to return and when sunset would occur. So we walked too far out. Furthermore, the one trail we took to get there left us nowhere to go in the event of a wild encounter. And given that the whole terrain was frozen, and we had used boots with no ice cleats, we weren't in the best position to defend ourselves. Mind you, we were in Pennsylvania, where officially, mountain lions are not said to inhabit anymore. We decided to take a longer route that had more open area around us, and a better chance of encountering other hikers, though it was night. Turns out the whole section around us was blocked off to vehicles, and everyone nearby is too lazy to hike in ice and 8 Fahrenheit weather. Regardless, we were walking back and hear the snarl of a mountain lion, not a bobcat, in front of us to the left. Hurriedly, we got our knives and flashlights out and looked around. We couldn't see it anymore, but we kept hearing noises and eye reflections behind us as we progressed. Eventually, my buds got too tired and we stopped. We hear a not-so-distant yelp of a coyote and we continued on our walk back. No more eye reflections, no sounds, nothing more for the remaining 9 or so miles of the trip. To make it worse, my buds ran out of water and food, and they were becoming increasingly fatigued. I know it's nothing crazy, but it's the most dangerous situation I've had thus far, especially considering at the time I thought it was something less than it was bobcat. But upon doing some research and listening to the difference in bobcat and mountain lion yells, it was most definitely a mountain lion, which makes it a lot more dangerous of a situation than we thought it was.
When working on my master's degree, I had to sample plants out in the middle of nowhere, Kansas. This is a tall grass prairie. If you've never been in untouched tall grass prairie, it's like a forest. The big blue stem gets over 8 feet high and it grows in bunches, so I think you can't push your way through it in some places. Truly a terrifying experience if you're alone and have to trek deep into a bluestem forest. More necessary context for this story is the status of mountain lions in Kansas. The Kansas wildlife officials refuse to acknowledge the presence of mountain lions in Kansas for political reason. So mountain lions have a cryptozoological status. Everyone knows someone who's seen one in Kansas. It's obvious they're there. But the scientific and political climate keeps any data from being collected, so they don't officially live there. So one time I was out sampling plants alone, the bluestem towering over my head. I had to forcefully push forward to bushwhack through these dense stands. It had rained the night before, so it was wet and humid and generally miserable. Out of nowhere, I broke through the grass wall into a long section of flattened grass. Like something had walked through the grass, something huge, flattening down the bluegrass in its path. I mentally checked through the possibilities. There weren't many. Dog? No. What dog would be big enough to do this, and why would it be out here? Cow? Cows were never out here because it wasn't grazing land. Horse? No. A horse's body mass is too high and wouldn't make a flattened path like this. That pretty much left a mountain lion. Then I found a mud patch in the path with a print. A huge cat print, bigger than my hand. I had a flip phone, so I snapped a pic and then ran for my life. I bushwhacked through the grass in a state of panic and terror, which is dangerous because there are other things in the grass that can get you. Got to my car safely. Flip phone pic was trash.
I also live in an area where they refuse to acknowledge the return of the mountain lion, and one literally almost killed me one night. 2 days later, pic related was photographed about a mile away and was featured in the local paper, and still they publicly doubted it was a mountain lion.
Well, beside the bear story and the mountain lion story, it was probably when I was car camping in a remote spot in the middle of the Brindabellas during a torrential rainstorm. I was set up at a small camping area and there were a couple other people set up with tents nearby. I went for a hike up the mountain for 2 to 3 hours, and when I got down, everyone else had packed up and bugged out. Odd. Little did I know the rangers had come by and advised them the national park was going into mandatory shutdown due to extreme weather approaching. It started to rain while I had lunch. Then it rained harder. I was pretty much stuck lounging around the back of my truck. By nightfall it was freezing cold and super foggy. The rain started coming down like a fucking waterfall. I couldn't keep my tarp up, so I just released it so it wouldn't rip, and I locked myself away in the back of the truck. It sounded like Niagara Falls was pouring down on top of me. I actually started getting nervous. I'd poke my head out occasionally to inspect, and the whole area was flooding. The road was a river of mud and the water was pouring down the mountainside and had risen about halfway up my tires. I started to think I might get flooded out completely, and also started to think I might be stranded and wouldn't be able to drive out. Alas, after about 3 hours the rain relented and the flooding receded. It was tricky getting out in the morning as the road was washed away in a lot of places, but I managed to get through all the mud and small canyons. Good times.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.